I'm really excited today to introduce you to one of the, amazing people at MIT. MIT has lots of amazing people. Bruno is one of the young, up and coming, amazing citizens of this community. Bruno is he's a lecturer of urban planning and negotiation. He is also the executive director of MIT Harvard Mexico negotiation program. Uh, he is well known. It's all written up for a course that we'll hear about, among many other things, 11.011, the art and science of negotiation, which has grown into one of the most popular and highest ranking humanities, arts, and social science electives at MIT. Bruno received his PhD in 2015. And here, here is something unusual. Usually what I just said is followed with, from department of blah, blah, blah. But I cannot do that. Why? Because Bruno created his own PhD at MIT, the one and only time that that's happened. And so he's one of a kind, as you will see in many, many ways. So what a delightful thing to hear that you can do. Bruno is a recipient of the very prestigious MIT Darbelow Fund for Excellence in Education, also a recipient of the Harvard Law School Award for the Best Research of the Year in Negotiation, Decision-Making, Mediation, and Dispute Resolution. His book, Winning Together, the Natural Resource Negotiation Playbook, was published by MIT Press in December 2017. As soon as it hit Amazon, it went out of stock not once but twice. Okay, so we got to learn how to do this. My books are still sitting on the shelf, waiting for someone to come and buy it. Prior to coming to MIT, Bruno was the youngest ever deputy director for the international affairs at Mexico's Ministry of Energy. Okay? He still looks so young that you could still say whatever he does, he's the youngest, and then fill in the blank. Okay, so I am so delighted to have Bruno with us today. It's presented as a conversation between Bruno and me, but it's really Bruno who I asked to talk about his work first, and then we can engage in conversation, not just with me, but with the rest of you. It's a very intimate group we have today. So, I hope that all of you jump in and interact with Bruno. So Bruno, let me turn it over to you, and welcome.
Thank you, Shigeru, for such a heartwarming introduction. Your trailblazing path in pedagogy and in research is well known, well beyond your field, and it's quite special to see the generosity with which you describe the very fortunate experiences that I've had before coming to MIT and being part of this amazing community. I also express a very heartfelt thank you to Molly Ruggles for the conversation we had during this pandemic, thinking about how we could have this xTalk be of service to the larger audience, both students and faculty on campus and beyond. All of us who are passionate about giving our heart in pedagogy and keep learning as it's, I think, the core of academia, just a passion and a drive to make the world a better place. And so for everybody who's joining us today, before I dive into what Shigeru has highlighted, which is a little bit of the context of the work I'm fortunate to do, I just hope that this talk finds you on the heels of celebrating a very lovely and joyous Mother's Day, and that all your loved ones have been spared from the tragedy of the pandemic, and that you're surrounded by robust health and the hope for very rewarding and joyful adventures in the coming summer, wherever we reach you today. In terms of the talk, really the context, just 5 minutes, as Shigeru has highlighted. I'm going to share with you some slides that situate the pedagogy and negotiation leadership that I lead on campus. Reciprocity in leadership and learning, negotiating impactful partnerships is the core message today, because we'll center on the tenets that drive the pedagogy that I foster on campus. And part of that endeavor is giving you a context of what we do at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. At the undergraduate level, before the pandemic started, these are some of the numbers that we had in terms of overall MIT undergraduate population, around 4,600 students. The Department of Urban Studies and Planning, which is an incredible community, has traditionally focused only on working with graduate students at the highest level. It's admirably ranked for many decades as the #1 planning department in the world, but a focus on undergraduate education had not been at the center of our activities, just given how the urban planning field approaches certain responsibilities. And with the arrival of Professor Ann Ben Joseph, and then currently now with Professor Chris Segrest, there's been a larger push to expand our presence in undergraduate education. One of the elements of that journey, and where I've been fortunate to contribute, is that if you look therefore at the number of undergraduates who usually come to our department, you're looking at a very small percentage, not even 0.1. Yet in the two classes that I've been able to design from scratch, 11.011 and 11.111, the first one is an introductory course in negotiation, the art of conflict resolution. The second one is an advanced course focused on leadership. Both courses work with one another, and in the year-long journey, the responsibility is to really test your blind spots, define your moral compass, and see the larger consequences that you have in the way you communicate with one another. And when I launched the courses, what was special is the increasing number of students pre-registering per year, to the point that when we compare by 2019, we had almost 700 students pre-registering for these two classes. The classes are electives, and that means that therefore 15% of undergraduates on campus wanted to take them. Electives that therefore do not have a built-in audience, are not part of any degree or major, even minor. So what is behind this interest in negotiation, teaching, and training? Have we always seen this difference, and is the subject matter alone what's driving these results? And the answer is relevant to MIT, certainly, but beyond, because it's very simple, it's saying no. We're fortunate to have the data about how students used to engage into the introductory course, the Art and Science Negotiation, when it was taught by colleagues that I admire deeply, both at the Harvard Business School and at DOSP, who then became vice presidents of the most important philanthropic foundations and some of the key consulting firms on the planet. And at that time, 2012, 13, 14, 15, the enrollment numbers were not moving and not large. Once I was able to take over and create a new syllabus from scratch, we see a significant increase. The number is impressive. And it is relevant in the sense that therefore we can discard the idea that it's because you're offering negotiation and leadership skills as perhaps space for you to discover how to better negotiate a salary or how to advance policies within your own startup. Those were needs that preceded my arrival. There are needs that continue now. What changed was, I think, the core answer that I gave at the time to people who told me that when we would teach MIT undergraduates, we should make sure to focus on data and numbers. They said, you're going to be teaching engineers and scientists, you better make sure that every single exercise that you have in class is tailored to those abilities. Sure enough, evidently, any negotiation that it's worth its salt will have that element. But I felt in my own experience, and Shigeru highlighted at that, since I negotiated creating a PhD in negotiation at MIT, that I thought it was the spiritual component of negotiation, the ethical, moral component that would really strike a chord with the amazing students that we have. The students that I was fortunate to share classrooms with as a graduate student at MIT, and I was always deeply impressed by our undergraduate students, let alone by the strength and stature of their intelligence in our classes, in the graduate classes themselves, but their drive to be exposed to MBA, JD, professional level materials all the time. So when I launched the classes, that was my commitment. I would take what I did in my research, of which Shigeru talked about, this focus on the toughest, most complex negotiations, certainly natural resource management, where you can't win an election to get an agreement passed through. You literally need nature to cooperate with you. You literally need the science to make sense for the agreement to thrive, whether you're talking about water resource management, environmental protection, or the development of renewable energy. And how could we therefore shape classes where the spark would be, can we have students fall in love with negotiation and plant the seeds of a lifelong journey where they take our classes and then they move past the classes and they continue to hone in those skills wherever they go. The most rewarding outcome is to see, and all this data is of course prior to the pandemic, we were lucky enough to continue to have great success when we transitioned online, and we'll talk about that today. But the key is that the time that students devoted to the classes continually increased. And that's what's rewarding, because what you want is not only students to really enjoy their experience with a subject matter, but you know that to the extent that they can devote to the subject matter the precious time, and for every MIT student, their time on campus is precious. They have so many different interesting activities to devote their time to, in addition to their extracurriculars that are often the most significant part of their education. You want to make sure that their time is valued and that the activities that you foster lead to what we have. Both classes being ranked for the last 5 years among the top 1% across campus. We have over 1,000 classes. So it's quite a big honor for us at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning to see that even if we don't have a built-in audience, the voice, the word of mouth is going to lead to students coming to take our courses. And in any class, certainly a social science class as mine, the core success of the class is going to be the talent that you have there. And the reasons are the tenets that draw my approach to negotiation, and therefore the approach of the students in the class. The first tenet is luminosity. When you receive the invitation to our event today, one of the elements I talked about was a sense of wonder around the cycles and the forces around us. And so MIT undergraduates certainly are at an age bracket where their youth allows them not to be jaded about what the world can be. So they come into the classroom willing to question what the world should look like, and willing to put forth not only their intellectual breadth, but their emotional resonance if you provide them with activities where they can move past just thinking about a subject and actually be manifest behaviors. So I'm fortunate that in the negotiation field, we have 30, 40 decades of amazing experts from around the world who have fostered both a sense of literature and a set of negotiation exercises that provide students with the opportunity to put themselves in different stakeholder shoes beyond the one that perhaps their heritage or interests represent, and therefore actively engage in a conversation, a negotiation, a persuasive process where they'll need to step out of perhaps some of the ideas or values that they traditionally have and contrast them. And this is not a arm's length conversation, it's rather a lived experience, because in every role play simulation, every single universe of students is being exposed to the same information as the other universes in the class. But inevitably, the outcome is always different, which showcases to them the level of agency that they have through the decisions they make, through the tone of their voice, through their body language, etc., through who they are, about what the outcome can be. And if any class, and certainly in social sciences, can move us away from the predictive approach that we often see on TV and in the media about what might happen in this election, what might happen in this negotiation, and instead we focus on how many cards we actually hold on the basis of how we think how we speak and how we behave, then we can spark that luminosity that I believe our students certainly have, and that in practice they showcase around the world with the companies that they build and the projects and the nonprofits that they contribute to. The second element is that I consider that when you are in a situation where you're mentoring young professionals, you have to embody the values and the tenets that you will be presenting in the class. And that's certainly quite demanding. And the only way you can commit to that path is if you as faculty and as someone who wants to develop an expertise in a field is constantly ready to redefine what's your understanding of the field itself. And so the classes are not a lecture to the students about what they ought to do. We follow a flipped class model. All the literature is far more extensive than the elements that we'll discuss in class. The message is very clear. You're being exposed to materials that will extend beyond your exercises so that you can apply them in your daily life, and will be flexible and comfortable with having debriefs, conversations on a weekly basis about the negotiations and about your applications of the tools and strategies in real life without a set agenda. And so what you see is that students are asked to really embody what they're experiencing in their sororities negotiations, in their fraternities partnerships, in the kind of behaviors that they model in their internships, in the kind of attitudes that they present in the classroom and beyond. And we do the same as faculty, not only having a large team of undergraduate TAs that took the courses, that showcased, let alone that they were brilliant in manifesting the intellectual insights in the field, but more importantly, having the warmth to care about one another. And therefore, on a weekly basis, we can filter through the experiences of the exercise and revamp what we do in the classroom based on not only what we're seeing in our audience, every single student being coached individually, but also in what the students who are now on the teaching role can bring to the table as a result of what they're going through in their own life and the fact that they share that same age bracket. And in that sense, I have to highlight that MIT has been very innovative, because in other universities, there's sometimes the fear that how could undergraduate students be responsible with TA-ship responsibilities that extend beyond the logistical elements of that you might see in other classes. And the point is, if you trust people to engage in one-on-one coaching, it's because you've seen them that they have the maturity to lift each other, that they have the ability to focus first on what they are good at and what people thrive at. And then once that there's that space of trust, then push them thoughtfully about how to get better and rediscover abilities inside of yourself that at the moment in time you may not believe in. And if the person who's making that case to you is a peer, you have a larger possibility of responding and achieving an outcome. The last tenet is reciprocity. I think that the community behind the success of our classes is based on this commitment to reciprocity. Many of my peers in the field achieve the same outcome in their classes, others don't. I think that you have to come in when you're teaching negotiation with a very clear message about what do you understand negotiation is about and what do you understand pedagogy is about. And to me, in the classroom, since you're going to be negotiating on a weekly basis, how well you prepare, how genuinely present you are during the 90 minutes of the negotiation, how sincerely you give your heart through your actions, your arguments, your drive, will impact the level and the degree of understanding of your peers. And so, unlike other situations, you're not only responsible for what might be the outcome at the end of the term for you in the class, you're responsible for the outcome of your peers. And it's only the community buys in, every single member in that responsibility, that therefore the knowledge can massively expand. And the reason why that's relevant is because as negotiators, we have that very same responsibility socially. You're not only representing an organization in a negotiation with another stakeholder, your decisions will impact people who are not sitting at the table. And it's that sense of the consequences about your actions and the ability and the care to try to genuinely drive them in a direction where it not only enlarges the pie for the people sitting at the table, but for the people beyond, that we can really see, therefore, a transformation from looking at wielding power, something that human beings can be very good at, to the detriment of others, or rather wielding it to really lift each other up. And you can only do that if you've developed a sense and a vision of responsibility that we have to one another. And that's what the classes have done. And all the credit goes therefore to the students who naturally, when given the space to manifest those values, inevitably showcase them and well beyond campus. And Shigeru, I hope this gives a larger sense of the context of the teaching on negotiation at MIT.
Thank you so much, Bruno. That was wonderful. That was wonderful. Absolutely, absolutely. Since this is a conversation, let me open it up with a couple of questions for you, and then we can open it up to the audience. I think everyone's here wanting to know how they can negotiate a salary raise. But before we get to that, there are a couple questions that as I was hearing you talk, and I've had a wonderful chance to read about your work, which there's quite a bit of it on the web. So, when I think about negotiation, I think about, who is going to win, who's going to lose, right? This kind of sort of zero-sum game. But the way that your course is described is very different. So, for example, your head, Professor Ben Joseph, in describing your course, says that students learn that negotiation is part of how you deal with ethics, with power, with politics, with decision-making, right? I mean, none of which I would have thought of for negotiation. We thought, it's like, punching and punching until one is down on the ground and the other is still standing up. How can you sort of elaborate on this idea of ethics, power, politics, and decision-making?
Oh, absolutely. And thanks so much, Shigeru, for outlining the question with the breadth in which you do it. It is absolutely true. Media and many of our leaders politically, socially, economically, often describe negotiation as a boxing match. And so what you see is people throwing punches rhetorically, economically, politically, to try to impose their will on one another. And to the extent feasible, we have to be responsible for understanding that that's just, regardless of which position someone might occupy in a society, and often a position of high stature and power, it does not mean that that person embodies the level of wisdom that human beings can really showcase in their daily demeanor. And so negotiation, well understood, is rather a dance. It's a dance in the sense that every single element involved will need to work in harmony. And you're not imposing your will on the other. You're rather playing with one another in a way where you're trying to create a symbiotic relationship where the rhythm, the melody, the response to the context is lifting each other to manifest the very best that we can. That certainly means that you're going to have to come into the field questioning, curious, open about redefining what you think is right and wrong, let alone in a negotiation itself, by being open to be persuaded by the other side about some of the key tenets or interests that they need to be met and served, but rather about what is your understanding, what are the biases that you might be facing. And by biases, I mean something that we naturally experience, for example, when we were younger and we were watching a movie that we really like as teenagers. We watch a scene and that scene tells us something at that point in time. And 10, 15 years later, when we watch it again, it's the same scene, but it doesn't tell us, we don't interpret the same way. And so if that happens with art, it should certainly happen with life. It doesn't get anything more wondrous, more complex, more more tough or more beautiful than life. And so you have to approach a negotiation as a manifestation, therefore, of what we believe in, and therefore our thoughts, what we choose to say, and therefore how we act. And we better be open to continuously question who we are and how we behave in the world, and give the space to the others by removing that quick rush to judgment, and by also investing our time to really polish our principles. And if we do that, we are taking the first steps to foster an energy in our interactions that might open the door for creativity and vision and imagination, which is what we need to shape a different world than the one we currently have. People can certainly keep the world going as it is, and in that case, sadly, the level of darkness, poverty, and inequality is too stark and too big. And so we better question our traditional mechanisms and behaviors and open door to something better. And sure enough, I trust MIT students to achieve that goal, definitely.
Thank you. Professor Ben Joseph goes on to say that this course will shift your thinking in new ways, and that's exactly what you're doing. One more thing, just sort of related to this in a very concrete way, and I think this will be a very concrete way. So one of the students who took your course said that in organizations where she's worked, she has been made to feel uncomfortable as a woman. Okay? But once she took your course, I would never have possessed the resolve to initiate a conversation about these feelings of discomfort until I took 11.011. Now I do. I take on difficult situations. I've discovered strength that I never knew I had. That's a really unexpected thing to come out of a course on negotiation. Empowering, in this case, a woman who was made to feel uncomfortable in work situations, but now she's able to assert herself. How did that happen?
If I recall correctly, that student then became a TA. It's Gillian Dressler.
Yes.
And as many of the students that we have in the classroom, the tenet with which I depart is I depart with a spiritual tenet, in the sense that souls have chosen to embody themselves in different manifestations, all kinds of different features and heritages. But the reality is that the depth with which that soul can manifest the very best of humanity is not dependent on any of those outside features, even though socially, historically, there's been a whole host of constructs to try to minimize, curtail, limit, or prevent people to showcase those abilities. And so to the extent that your conversation about the materials manifests those opportunities, and people can awaken all that strength that is in us, regardless of what kind of challenges we face socially, economically, politically, gender-wise, then the voice, not the voice of reason, the voice of intuition, a voice that has a wisdom that sometimes exceeds what we may factually know, is going to be the spark that's going to trigger a strength. And if that process of discovery is happening with peers who also may have experienced those situations, then we're sending into the world an energy that will then question those structures in real life, and will thoughtfully advocate for transformation with a belief that is centered on trust and positivity, and not on pushback and exclusion. And so an example of that, perhaps to to highlight it, and I often say with my students, is when we discuss how to best run a city, we look at the mayors that have thrived, not the many mayors across different societies that do not. When we discuss religious hierarchies, we should focus on how saints behave, not take the example of people who put on a robe and do crimes. And the same happens, therefore, with how we go about manifesting any principle in real life. We have to have the discernment to understand what skills we have to bring to the table. For those in my class who tend to be Christian, I always make the case, hey, certainly Jesus said, you have to turn the other cheek. When he was communicating in a certain moment, don't be quick to judgment. And if you answer violence with violence, this is where it could lead. But in the very same passages, he also went to the temple and with physical force took all the tables, threw them out of the temple, and accused everybody selling indulgences there of not really representing the tradition correctly. And so you have to be able to see what story you call to mind in order to manifest that strength. And to me, to wrap up, as you were talking about Jill's example, evidently, I think life is pretty obvious in what it has traditionally entrusted, what gender it has entrusted, the responsibility of gestating a soul. And so I can't never understand when I have my student, how could we never honor the level of strength that women truly have, when evidently nature said, those are the ones who can take on 9 months of pregnancy. The men, I don't trust them to do so. So my departure point is, as a negotiator, any woman is going to showcase all the strength that they have. We would give them the space to do so, often better than we can as men.
I feel the need to jump in at this moment as a representative of my gender. Yay for 9 months, women go. Sorry to interrupt. This is actually a great conversation, but there are 2 comments in the chat that I want to make sure that you have a chance to address. And one is just about the logistics about getting back to kind of the pedagogical, the pedagogy and the way that you actually run your class, Bruno. Vladina is asking about just ways of how you assess and how you structure and organize your class, learning outcomes and things like that. Can you just talk a little bit about some of those practical things for a moment?
Sure. And Shigeru and I actually met yesterday. He was kind enough to devote time in his ever-packed schedule to have a conversation about what he had seen in my work. And we talked about the emphasis on introspection in our class. And so a large part of the effort of the students goes towards understanding their confidential instructions for the negotiations, negotiating with their peers, reflecting about it, and therefore writing weekly essays where they reflect upon their experience. And we make it very clear to them that what we're measuring is their level of introspection. We provide them with templates and examples from former peers that were able to achieve that level of effective introspection. And we decouple your negotiation outcome, certainly at the beginning of the term, from your introspection. Because in life, what you want is to have a larger sense of the long term. And what you want to develop are the right behaviors. Can we develop the personality to be comfortable enough to question how we go about things and be happy about questioning them, regardless of what was the outcome? And therefore, as we become better about understanding ourselves and others, then we can manifest better behaviors. And so that is a very empowering space for students who perhaps might be less extroverted or less talkative than others, and who may think that in negotiation they will never be able to thrive, because negotiation is a space for people who really feel comfortable taking over a table and being the center of the party. And so we emphasize the entire structure of the class is centered on your effort. And your effort is something that you control regardless of the background that you've had. It's something that you can convey and communicate to, connected to what kind of experience you're going through in the semester beyond the class itself. And it therefore is flexible and tailored to the journey that each student has. And in a very Montessori way, in the same way that a student might be able to cover far more ground than another in a certain point in time, what I want each student, like in a sports team, is to be the best version of themselves on a weekly basis and then take the steps to get there. And so that's the structure of how the syllabus conveys what we do, and on a daily basis, our conversations, our exercises, and our feedback in their essays.
Thank you. Just one more chat that I think is relating to what Shigeru and Bruno, you've already been talking about. Aaron is asking questions about sort of in the microcosm, in the level of your classroom, how you handle questions around power and privilege. And can you talk about some specifics on how you deal with that with your class? Thank you.
Sure, I appreciate both the past question and this one. You know, the second tenet that I talked about was embodiment. And so there's inevitably, when you're born, as it was in my case, in an emerging economy, born, raised, and educated by wonderful parents, but also from humble economic backgrounds in Mexico, you're deeply aware of the challenge that socially and economically we face in emerging economies, often very harsh, or harsher than what you may find in developed economies. And so, as I was granted the blessing and the opportunity to study my graduate degree at MIT, my research wanted to really focus, and that's what I did, on power disparities. That's literally at the core of all the research that I do. My work with MIT Press really explores, okay, when you have governments leading emerging economies and governments leading developed economies, and they are sharing transboundary water, energy, or environmental resources, what are the steps that actually challenge the status quo in a way where we can live together, win together in mechanisms and behaviors that lift each other up? And one of the examples I often talk about is that, therefore, what you discover when you talk with the practitioners, the people who really work on the ground in the communities 5, 10, 15, 20 years and truly lift them up, is an ability and a responsibility to be able to be a chameleon in the right sense of putting yourself in different people's shoes and being able to advocate fairly on the merits for them. So the ethos of the class equally manifests that, in the sense that every single student is entrusted to look inwards towards what are the communities, responsibilities professionally, countries that they want to join, and what would be the behaviors at the micro level at home with your partner, a larger level with your family, relatives, with your friends, within the company you work at, and definitely socially. What are the behaviors that you can manifest in the way you lead, communicate, negotiate, that address those disparities? And so every single person can only do as much as they can based on their awareness of what even life is about, what a life well lived means. And to the extent that you can develop a much larger sense of empathy for the pain of one another by mining whichever path you have, all the better. I certainly have always manifested in my classes the fact that on my dad's side, everybody fought World War II. And I therefore understand the level of darkness to which human beings can get at, and therefore the fragility of life and the blessing if you're given life. If you don't even go to university, how can you leave a legacy for your grandchildren, as my grandparents did for me? And on the Mexican side, the same thing. Like, how is the tradition and the challenges of a former colony, when we are a mixture, as is in my case, of indigenous blood and Spanish blood, what is it that we can do to redefine our past in a way where we lift each other up? And so a lot of my research and teaching manifests that, with that curiosity and sense of wonder about how can we become better human beings on a daily basis, because it's a lifelong journey and we don't have all the answers. We can only control the energy we put into to become better human beings.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Shigeru.
There's another question from Vladina here.
Yes, hi, thank you. I was wondering to what extent the scenarios that you use in the classroom, the negotiation exercises the students participate in, To what extent are those authentic situations something that has happened in the past, negotiations from diverse contexts, probably? Or to what extent do people bring their own scenarios that they could practice on?
Sure. Thank you very much, Olivia, for your question. Three elements come into play. A significant part of the materials that we rely in the classroom, cases, role-play simulations, and certainly the literature, will bring to bear negotiations that have stature and meaning in different regions of the planet, and they'll have access to those negotiations through the eyes of different stakeholders. Therefore, they'll be able to vicariously live through certain moments in history or in time and try to put themselves in a situation that might be different from what they had perhaps experienced before. For example, in our advanced class, as part of the great work that the program of negotiation at Harvard Law School, of which MIT is one of the founders, does, there are cases where even ethnic conflicts are discussed. And so we will study if we have a conflict that is, for example, sad and charged and it involves Armenian and Azerbaijani, and we study what is the heritage of our students in class, we'll make sure to entrust them to play a role that perhaps will be different from the tradition, spiritually, or culturally they come from. And inevitably, by being able to put themselves in other people's shoes, they'll have an added vantage point with which to question how actually people in real life deal with situations. In addition, we continue one-on-one coaching sessions across the term where we have conversations with the students about the specific situations that they face. And in MIT, what happens is that you have students who are literally running a multi-million-dollar startup already and who really want to talk about how they should navigate equity dynamics with their co-founder who was a friend in the dorm, but suddenly now became friend, or perhaps the boyfriend of a girlfriend who was, and it gets really tricky emotionally. You have to coach them about those elements that really brings personal life to the whole other range of situations, which is students trying to imagine what could be a space as they find themselves where they could perhaps manifest their abilities. And so what we'll do is then entrust them to go back when the term ends, particularly those who want to be involved either in research and pedagogy, to take some of the existing materials in the field, traditionally materials that have been created in Cambridge by professionals with certain economic and social background, and question that structure and see what could we change in the roles, in the structure, in the behaviors, and instruct young undergraduates to reshape the pedagogy earlier in the process rather than when they join professional schools 12, 15 years afterwards, when they perhaps have been socialized too much with how things are done in the world. So we pursue those different approaches and then we manifest them in our classrooms.
Thank you.
Let me ask you a question, Bruno.
Sure.
So this has to do with sort of the mechanics of your class. So you limited your enrollment to 42 because you wanted to get to know the students. And for you, it's not just the voice, the language, but also the nuances of facial expression, body gestures are important to you. And so two questions. One, why 42? And second, how were you able to translate that into the online Zoom kind of way of teaching?
Thank you, Shigeru. Of course, by what you highlight in terms of the focus on personalized and tailored coaching. The bandwidth that we have to, that I believe we have to showcase to our students in terms of the care for the emotional journey that they're going through, that is often past and well beyond the classroom, but the ability to be receptive to that means that as faculty, you have to create a space or a community where the number of students will allow for different negotiation universes as we progress through the term to be imbued by the experience, by the tenets, by the behaviors, by the styles that they see in the classroom. So you want that community to be able to develop as you would do within an office in a government or within a company, a sense of how people traditionally behave in the space what are some of the traits and personality styles. And so those numbers, not only usually 36, 42 are multiples of 2 and 3 and 4 and 6 and 42 of 7, and therefore you can have different negotiation role plays that address those combinations without needing to repeat roles. But in addition, it's been proven it's a number that allows the students to track with good memory and take notes about people's styles, demeanors, and behaviors. And so in the debriefs, I move a lot. And yesterday when we were talking, you had not seen me teach, and you said, I bet that you move a lot, and it's very true. I am dancing all the time across the classroom in the same way that I ask students to do the same, because you're trying to take note of how people communicate and convey insights. And the way in which you can also do that as we transition to online was to rely on the ease of being able to record your negotiations and therefore be able to contrast right away. How do you actually come across? Sure enough, you miss the lower part of the torso and your legs, which in practice, all the studies, both in neuroscience and body language, showcase that are the ones that are most telling, rather than our upper torso or on our face, about how we really feel about the subject. But at least now you have an opportunity to right away see, hey, I thought I was coming across as rational and caring. And when I look at my video, boy, I would scare my younger sister with the eyes I made and the tone I spoke with. And so to the extent that you can facilitate people being able to track and see themselves on video, and then you can discuss it in the classroom as if you were looking at the ESPN highlights of how a team performed yesterday. And you watch the video and you say, oh, this is what I can do differently. Oh, by the way, that's not me on the video, but it's a good friend of mine. I actually know her. And I know she's not like that, but look how she came across. And therefore, I could also have that same mistake. How could I do better? I think that the ability to be able to manifest visually how you communicate, certainly transitioning online didn't withdraw any ability, it actually extended it. We already made negotiations, we videotaped them with cameras and iPads when we were teaching in person. Zoom made it faster and easier for people to right away have the recording and reflect on it. And we will be bringing those innovations when we convene in person, God willing, this fall, and continue to innovate in also how we run podcasts and how we videotape confidentials and so on. There's a lot of innovation to be done yet in the field, and I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you. Thank you. Other questions?
I may ask.
Vincent.
Thanks. Hi, Bruno. Following up on what Professor Miyagawa said, I've been thinking about how an approach like yours could scale. Maybe thinking about scaling is just the wrong answer. I've spent too long among startups, but getting into 11 is maybe more competitive than getting into MIT at this point. And if things keep going that way, I was curious whether you've thought about how can this experience be extended to more students, or like how you think about that problem?
Vincent, I appreciate your question. You were certainly an outstanding student and a memorable peer in the field, and I'm really happy to share time again with you. And you're right that I think that there are 3 steps where the values and the experiences are extended. The first one is all the students who therefore take these insights and manifest them in their own companies through the trainings that they launch. There are multiple students who then become negotiation coaches in their companies. They launch trainings. The second element is that many undergraduate students join other classes on campus and advocate, particularly engineering classes, for creating modules where negotiation role plays can be run. And I trust them, and I've seen them, I don't need to be involved, to thrive in leading the pedagogy. In terms of reaching a larger audience, which I think, particularly because of the spiritual bent, as you highlight, would be worth it, it's taking the step into creating materials that would allow us to even devote more time to the one-on-one coaching by having in video the confidentials instead of having to read them, by having in video MIT alumni, not from my classes, rather stakeholders from different industries, discuss different negotiation scenarios and cases, and make it available for students so that by flipping the class even more, we could create even more time in the classroom and outside of the classroom to give that one-on-one coaching, and therefore expand the number of students who can take the classes. Eventually, if you want to maintain that level of personal connection, you have to innovate in terms of the resources that fund these classes. And there certainly there's room to grow in terms of how universities see negotiation and leadership training beyond just something that is done at the professional level in the professional schools, but rather something that we really prioritize with young undergraduates. And I'm certainly ready and willing to put my hands on the ground when that happens.
Sounds good. Thank you. I'm curious how you help students discover blind spots, like both in terms of maybe not noticing things that are actually should be important, or maybe not understanding, someone else's priorities or like the way they feel. How do you develop that?
Oh, certainly you got to experience it, Vincent, and you put me on the spot here by trying to ask me to share one of the magic dynamics in the classroom. But there's no problem in highlighting that. I think that what we tap is the spark of genuine curiosity that people can have about themselves, in the sense of why they do what they do. And so role play simulations by nature, by the fact that you're stepping in your role, give you an opportunity, if well understood, to put on a different costume and play a little bit with who you might be right now, who you might want to become. Sort of like acting can be a space for people to manifest some abilities that are latent, but have yet to be manifested. But what happens is that when you do that, you're going to have a consequence. You're going to have a response from the outside world, and you'll have to grapple with how people respond. And so if you have a role play simulation at the beginning of the term that is more centered on hard bargaining, and you're driven in that moment by the sense of winning and the message that the stakeholder that you represent said, take no prisoners, and you achieve that economic outcome. But then in the debrief, you have to deal with the consequences of 15 peers looking at you like, I might not invite you ever again to any MIT party because I cannot trust you. Then it creates a little space for you to question, what do I value most? And there's not a right answer. It's an answer you're going to keep honing in and developing. And so that's where we can find a little bit of our blind spots. They extend beyond the conversations about the privilege and racial, ethical, social components that people bring into the table, but even the deeper spiritual answers that we have at the moment as human beings about what life is about and what we really care about and what win really means. And so we create the situations, but all the credit goes to the students who are willing to push through and question. And there's certainly different degrees. And what's always been very rewarding is, as you are one example and many other alumni, that they reach out 4 or 5 years later to talk about how this or that experience in class is informing their behavior at NASA and this and that government and so on. You don't expect it when you're teaching negotiation that's what they're going to reach out about. And that's because people took ownership of the journey, and then it has therefore stayed with them. And so for me, and you know it, Vincent, I've always expressed it to the students, I am deeply aware of how special it is to be a young soul who's at MIT, who has the stature intellectually to take on the demanding courses that our university offers, but equally wants to have an impact on the world that extends beyond just thriving economically individually. And so I believe in that magic in the classroom. And if you believe in that magic, often people will surprise you with who they can become and who they're going to be. And that's all the recipe. A little bit of belief and then letting the talent shine.
Thanks.
Bruno, thank you so much. We're out of time. So we have to ask you about how we negotiate for salary raise next time. But in the meantime, there's a committee that's looking at the future of MIT education. And one thing that they emphasize is that the future of MIT education has to educate the whole student and not just a slice of, academic part of the student. We have to also deal with the spirit of the student as well as that. And I think your course is a perfect example of that. You're not just dealing with numbers, hardcore numbers and crunching numbers, but you're saying that you have to really look at the students as a whole, their ethics, where they're coming from, the context in which they're working. And I think this is why your course is so popular and has helped so many students. And we were very fortunate to hear just a slice of what you've been able to do. So I thank you, and I wish you luck as you move forward with these exciting initiatives. So thank you so much. And we can give Bruno a round of applause.
Thank you so much, Shigeru. I'll be super brief and quick to express thank you for how heartfelt you are and generous you are with your wisdom. You have decades of actually walking the walk of inspiring students across this planet, and that you gave me 1 hour to chat with you is quite a blessing. I feel the same way about all the conversations I had with Molly, and I'm grateful for the love of everybody who joined today. Certainly many of you, I've been fortunate to work with you as students or colleagues or administrators on campus. Thank you for taking an hour to spend with me, and may you be able to awaken that spark in your upcoming negotiation, whether it's around salary, whether it's about making the world a better place. I'm sure that you're going to thrive if you listen to that inner voice that has all the wisdom and that we all own and can knock on its door. So thank you, Shigeru, Molly, and everyone, and all the blessings of health throughout this summer.
Thank you so much.